Good evening, everybody. Actually started a bit early this week, which is the next best thing to a miracle. Let me just turn that off. Good evening, everybody. Actually started a bit early this week, which is just listening to the microphone there, because last week it was really distorted. It sounded like a thrash. That's not me, that's the motorcycles outside. It sounded like a thrash metal group, and there wasn't a lot I could do about it. I don't know why that was. It was fine on the live stream. So yeah, no Rachel yet, no Team Open Clock Club, still at real work. So they'll join us later, hopefully. So I think the microphone, from what I just heard, was better this week. So give me the thumbs up. Anyway, evening, Derek and Franklin and other people who were there, but not visible. So my name's Matthew Reed. This is our weekly live stream of fixing an old clock. Welcome. Try and keep this thing going. I've just lost my too many screens. There we go. So we're repairing this old longcase clock, grandfather clock mechanism. And last week we had an exciting week because we got to the point where we got it ticking. Just what we call the going train, the time side of things. But that was good. That was a bit of a landmark. Just move my screens around, and nice to see that. So that was fantastic, and the going train is still in there. So what we'll do is we'll just revisit the other half of this project, which is a striking train. In fact, there are three halves to this project in the best way with math. Microphone, good. Thank you, Derek. Great. I had no idea what happened last week, but there you go. I'll blame it on the kids. Good evening, Ian. Yeah, so there are three halves to this project. My good old math. There's the time side, what we call the going train, which we dealt with last week. Pretty much got that done, other than a little bit more cleaning to take place. Then there's the striking side. So that's the side that strikes the hours. And we've done some work on that already. I think there's just one more kind of major repair to do after today's session. And then we'll move on to cleaning the dial, the painted surface, and making some hands, because the clock has got no hands. So I'm sure there's a joke there, but anyway, let's not go there. So all good. We'll press on with the striking train this evening. And a bit of a silver soldering coming up. And for those of you who are new to all this, an extra special, got to be careful how far I zoom because there's so much junk in the shot, cables and bits of clocks and things. Look at that. Able to disappear, maybe not. Anyway. So yeah, there are two broad kinds of soldering in horology. One of them is what we call soft soldering. So that's the kind of stuff that you do on your plumbing with lead, effectively. It's not necessarily lead anymore, but it's relatively low temperature and relatively weak, but actually incredibly useful for horological repairs for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is if you soft solder, you can usually keep the temperature just below where the material is affected, like the annealing or softening of brass and that kind of thing. So it's quite useful to us. And then there's hard soldering, which is silver soldering. So the kind of stuff that silversmiths would use, and it's much stronger. So it's a bit more akin to brazing, which is soldering with brass. And it's much stronger, but higher temperature. So you don't get out and out, as they say. So we have to have as many tools in our soldering armory. Anyway, we're back to hard soldering this week. So we've got Simon and Dick and Vicky and Mike and Matthew. So Matthew's here from America. So he's either got a day off work or working from home. Anyway, let's get this train apart. Get rid of these cogs that we don't want anymore. They can disappear for another couple of weeks. Let me see those. Evening, Jeremy. I guess, Matthew, there are many Morgan towns in the States, and it's a question that everybody will ask, but is yours the Morgan town from the famous Joni Mitchell song? Hope it is, because we were just talking about Joni Mitchell the other day. Anyway, I think her album Blue is 50 years old, and slightly scary thought, but my daughter said maybe she'll still be around when it's 100 years old, which is good fun. Anyway, hi, David. So let's just have a quick look at the anatomy of our striking train. Just get rid of the train there, put that to one side. So like our going train, we've got a barrel here. I'll get a pointy stick. We've got a barrel around which a line wraps to drive the clock, a winding square on which the winding key fits, a ratchet for holding back the weight when the clock's wound. We repaired, or actually replaced, the ratchet click spring, which isn't on at the moment, a few weeks ago, and a little slip washer which holds the whole thing in place. Interesting that this slip washer is broken through. Obviously, whoever made it very thin here, and at some point it's actually given way altogether, but it's fine, still totally functional, so no need to do anything about that. Just a reminder that visitors, hi James, thank you for joining us. Got a good turnout this evening. When you fit these slip washers, I've mentioned this before, they don't have to be tight in the sense of, you can see that wobble between the wheel and the base of the barrel. That's absolutely fine. When the clock is running, the force, of course, from the weight through here, from the weight to the driving pinion, is in this plane. It's not across the axis of the wheel. So it's not getting pushed sideways. People tighten these, and there's a good reason why I say not to tighten those up. They're slightly dished, and I think what people do is they get their ball peen hammer and whack the thing here and then push it on. You don't need to do. Wobbly is good. In fact, wobbly and end shake and side, what we call end shake and side shake in clockmaking, is often really good. And there's a good reason for not tightening that washer, and that's because when you wind the clock, every action has a opposite and equal reaction. And so let's say the clock is, let me get this right, slightly forgotten. So the clock is running in this direction like this, and it obviously runs down. So you have to wind it once a week, and you wind it in this direction. If this washer is tight, then there's a lot of friction between these two components, and it forces the wheel and the whole train and the escape wheel backwards. And I don't think everybody stops the pendulum before they wind the pendulum clock. On a going barrel clock, it doesn't matter because it's effectively got maintaining power. So it's got, by design, a way of keeping the clock running when you wind it. This hasn't. And if you've got the pendulum swinging, then the pallets and the escape wheel are going to clang into one another. And you can actually, I've seen it where it's damaged teeth on escape wheel. So a long way of saying, leave this washer, this whole arrangement nice and wobbly. Anyway, we'll get back to that in a couple of weeks' time. So that's our great wheel. Second wheel in the train here is our pinwheel. So these two mesh together. And we were talking last week about gear ratios and things. This has got, as you can see there, it's got 8 pins driven into its edge. And what happens is that every time this wheel moves on one of these stations, it lifts the hammer which strikes the bell. So if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if the clock strikes 8 o'clock at night, or 8 o'clock, for instance, night or day, this wheel is going to make one complete rotation. If it strikes 1, it's going to make 1/8 of a rotation, and so on and so forth. Next wheel up the train, which is the one we're going to be working on in a minute, is our gathering wheel. And the gathering wheel has got a component fitted to the front of it, or the gathering arbor, which interacts with work that's between the front of the clock movement and the back of the clock dial, called under dial work. And this counts the, it's a counting system for the striking. So these two wheels, let's get them the correct way around, interact like this. We've got a wheel, I think it goes that way around, driving a pinion. And this wheel, the gathering wheel, makes one rotation for every one of these pins that passes the hammer. So we know, therefore, that the gear ratio between these two mobiles, wheels, mobiles, is got to be 8:1. Okay, so one of these pins for every one rotation of this lever or gathering pallet here. And if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 leaves on this pinion, so 7 teeth or leaves on the pinion, therefore there must be 7 multiplied by 8, whatever that is. I'm sure some of you can, Rachel's here, turned up, but not actually in the room. Wonders of technology. So whatever 7 times 8 is how many teeth there are on that wheel. So always useful to do a train count, and then just finish off our little tour of the striking train. We've got the warning wheel, and again, this is the wheel that runs, well, the whole train runs, but this is to do with the preparation of the striking train for striking. Now, it doesn't really matter how many times this wheel turns around in relation to this. You can see that it's got a little pin driven into its rim. As long as it's an integer number, a whole number, where, and it's probably 7 or 8 again, I don't know, I could count it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 leaves on the pinion. So it'll be some multiple of 7 on there. So this has to go around an integer number of times, a full number of times. And then last but not least, we've got our fly, which we've already worked on a little bit, straightening up this spring and sorting out the friction. And yeah, that's right. I was waiting for Rachel with a fire extinguisher or a bucket of ice cold water, although my daughter's around somewhere, but I imagine like by the time that she's taken her headphones off and realized what time it is, the whole house will have burnt down. And then we've got our fly, which is our air brake or inertial air brake device that regulates the speed at which this train runs. So if you increase the ratio between these two, doesn't matter how many times this turns round, you increase the speed of rotation of this in relation to the rest of the train, and therefore the amount of work this does in terms of displacing and moving air out of the way and friction. So all good. Right, so the train's fine. We've given it a preliminary wash, but it needs a bit more. So the problem or challenge is that you might have seen this on the thumbnail for the advert for this event. This arbor, if you can see, has got a square filed on the end of it. We're talking about filing squares on the Facebook group, and I did a little, I haven't lost it. Oh, there it is. Did a little exercise, which is a really useful thing to do if you've not done this kind of making before. So just get a bit of steel and file a square on it. This is all done by hand, no lathe involved. And then file a square in a bit of brass, drill a hole through and put a taper pin in, and you get a cool little sort of test piece like that. So this is a nice little exercise to do if you're a beginner in clockmaking. It's really, really important. I think I see a lot of people, no criticism, that take clocks apart and put them back together again. And it's so easy. I know I'm not speeding up today. I got my website, proto website finished today. So it kind of felt like I'd actually achieved something for once in my life. So I'm pretty chilled out. I want to get this bit of steel soldered on, but if we do that, then we're all good. So yeah, this has got a tapered square filed on the end. And through that square was drilled a hole, which you put a pin through, and it holds this component, the gathering pallet, in place. Now that had broken through for whatever reason, and the end had dropped off. So there's no way of holding this on. And you can see it's worked loose on the square, which is bad news. That's never going to be successful. And then somebody had tried to put some soft solder in the joint, but it's not going to happen. Well, it did happen, but it's not going to be any good. So what we're going to do is we're going to solder on a new piece of metal, try and retain as much of the original material as possible, and then we'll have to kind of fill the hole in this thing with solder or something. Don't quite know what yet. Don't really want to make a new one, but I will if I have to. Good. So there's our striking train. And yeah, that filing exercise is really good. It takes a couple of hours, and the first time you do it, it's probably a bit rough, but once you've done 10 or something, then it's good fun. Right, okay, so we got a few weeks ago, we got a piece of blued pivot steel. So this is carbon steel that's been hardened and tempered a bit. And I turned in the end a female center, a cone, a sort of a concave cone, and I filed on the end of this a male center, a convex type cone. And as you can see, they fit together, which is really cool. So I'm going to solder them. We did talk about whether we should drill it or cut it off altogether. On the Facebook group this week, we've had this great exercise, which is I've found fantastic. We'll talk about it on Saturday at Open Clock Club, where I kind of community conservation project gave people the option of saying, what would you do? And of course, what we found is there are about 15 different ways of tackling even what seems like an ostensibly simple repair. No such thing, of course. So I've turned the end on this. I've done this in the wrong order, I realized, because once this is soldered on, I want to be able to cut this off and then file this new bit square to match the old bit, and then we can drill a hole and put the thing together. But I'm slightly concerned that this material, you can file it, but it's really difficult. File tends to slip off. This doesn't need to be like hardened per se. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just let this down now. That means I'm going to anneal the material. So steel and brass have got these amazing qualities that in your workshop, homework, even a home workshop like this, you can harden them and you can temper them or anneal them. In fact, you can harden them, three different things: harden, anneal, and temper. So anneal is to soften as soft as you can get the thing. Hardening is to harden it as hard as you can get the thing. And then tempering is to draw the hardness towards annealing again, which we do with steel, with heat. With brass, it's slightly different, because to harden a bit of brass, you actually mechanically work it. Steel doesn't work hardening quite this, well, not at all the same way that brass does. So I'm going to first just let this down a bit. I'm going to anneal this. When I hard solder it, it will get annealed a bit, but I don't want to risk it being too hard and then it ruining my files and all that kind of stuff. So my first step before I do that is I want to cut a notch in this, because when I solder it on, I don't want this great big piece of steel on there. I only probably want, how much do I want? Only a few millimeters, actually, thinking about it. Let's just start stalling for time. How much do I need on there? I'm going to leave about 1/4 of an inch, 8 millimeters, 6 to 8 millimeters, something like that. It doesn't matter, we can cut it down. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut through this piece of material sort of 90% of the way. And then this is all in theory, of course. The slick twixt cup and lip, as old Shakespeare said. Was it Shakespeare? No. Oh, gosh, she knows. In coy now. Anyway, so I'm going to cut through this with the graver And then when it's soldered on, I can just snap it off. But I could be quite brutal with it and just cut it with a piercing saw. I'm going to turn it in the lathe. If I can find the lathe, so it's reasonably neat. It's always good to get the lathe out. So I'm going to pop this chap in a lathe collet like that and get my graver. I'll get the graver. When I say my graver, most of these tools are stolen, as you know, anyway. So some post students probably still looking for their favorite graver. If I'm going to use this one, this is carbide. Actually, it makes life easier. Carbide's move out of the way a little bit. Carbide's great for gravers. It does chip quite easily. So again, you get that incredible hardness, but with that hardness comes brittleness as well. Again, you don't get out for now. Maybe I won't use that actually.
Derek says brass will time harden as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point actually, Derek, about age hardening of materials. And I think with those French clock straps that we've been looking at in on the Facebook group, please join our Facebook group, by the way, if you're not already a member. And I think that's what happens. You get this kind of, yeah, exactly that age hardening of materials. I know aluminium does that as well. I think steel, I think that's why a lot of the kind of old tools and files that we've got that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old seem particularly good, is because they, yeah, probably John's, it's not John's graver. He hasn't got a carbide graver. The Gris graver actually was a gift from a former student. But yeah, age hardening is interesting. I don't know much about metallurgy, but so I'm just going to cut. We're using the oblique face. I'll have to use my eyeglass and get my head in the way so I can see. So just cutting with the oblique face of the graver. I mean, people bang on about carbide tools, and they are brilliant, but they're not the be-all and end-all if you don't have them. They're carbon steel. Remember, people use carbon steel for hundreds and hundreds of years. So, Jeremy, a gift, yeah, that kind of gift. So carbon steel is absolutely fine, but yeah, carbide makes life a bit easier. But yeah, as I said, you get that opportunity for it to chip more. I've actually you can prevent carbide from chipping by slightly relieving the back of the non-cutting face to make the sort of included angle at the cutting edge slightly less. It will still cut, but it just strengthens it up enormously. Any questions? Yes, any questions, please ask as we go along. So, cut about 4/5 of the way through now. Obviously, I want to make it as thin as possible, but without it actually breaking off before we get to the point. maybe that'll do. So you can see, close the camera will focus, maybe it won't. There we are, I can see that, yeah. So I've turned it, yeah, pretty thin. So hopefully when it's soldered on, we'll just be able to snap it off. I thought well, for 1 minute and I turned the wrong end, but no, I haven't. Good, the next thing I need to do then is to anneal that bit. The cutaway bit will actually help with the soldering as well. I can't remember, we were doing something a few weeks ago where I cut some material away to prevent the heat traveling up the work, so you don't have to heat it up as much. So this is where we set something on fire. Let's just get a little hearth going like this. So all we need to do is to heat this bit of material till it's bright orange, basically. Forget the old cherry red thing. I've never found that that works in particular. And gas in the little torch. Use this one up. Ooh, there we are. That's it. First famous singeing of the hair already. Well done. It wouldn't be the same, would it, if we didn't have that? And weirdly, that flame's quite hot. I always forget, it's something about it it's so attractive. As a bit of a pyromaniac, but also slightly, I'm sure there's many Simpsons videos about that. These torches are really hopeless. I say that every week. The day when I throw this away will be a good day. Right, okay. Too hot. Too hot to handle. It's hopeless. Put that in there, let it cool, so-called naturally. So yeah, I need a bit of big sign that says, Matthew, that bit of steel that's glowing red hot is actually hot, hence the name. Anyway, so while that's cooling, I'm going to do something else. Can't quite remember what it is. Put this in the lathe, I think. I'll just clean up the end because one of the golden rules of soldering, 3 golden rules of soldering, I think. One is the work's got to be completely clean. If it's oxidized or greasy, then the solder will not stick to it. 2, there has to be a space for the solder to go, to run into. If you've got 2 surfaces that are perfectly mated together and the solder can't get between, then they're going to be a really weak joint with the solder kind of floating about on the surface. And yeah, those torches are hopeless. Don't buy those creme brulee torches, even though I use one every single week and really hate the thing. They're totally useless. Anyway, I don't know why I torture myself. The third thing is that you've got to get the work at the right temperature. So if you put your solder on before it gets hot enough and it's slowly coming up to temperature, then all that happens is everything will get oxidized, go black, and your joint will not be successful. Mustn't lose that. So that's probably relatively cool. I've got some cold water somewhere. Well, just to cool it down. Good. And then because we've heated this up, it's going to need cleaning because it'll be, well, it is, as you can see, it's still hot at the end. Right. and it needs cleaning up, otherwise the solder isn't going to stick to it. So a slight work order issue there. I should have annealed it, then turned it, then it would all be clean. But anyway, not to worry. So for the gathering pallet, which has been heated up by somebody trying to solder the gathering pallet on, yeah, work order issues. As I would say to my students, plan your work. It's much more efficient that way rather than just starting then realizing you've got to take 3 steps backwards. Okay, so I want to clean this up, but I don't want to remove much material. In fact, I don't want to remove any material if I can help it. But I'm going to have to do, I might actually say, if I had a bit to hand, I would use a bit of abrasive paper there, maybe, which is unusual, but I don't, so I'm not going to. So I'm just going to use diamond lap and just to remove the black from the end. I keep our material removal to a minimum. Oh, thank you, by the way, those people who bought our new depthing and bushing Kindle download thing. Appreciate that. They have made a few sales, so hopefully that'll slowly work its way into the kind of collective consciousness of clockmaking, and people will hopefully think, well, I'm sure they do think already, but think more about why they're doing bushing. No bushing without depthing, as I say. But anyway, so thank you for buying the download. It will eventually crop up as either a hardbound book or a print-on-demand book, but we're waiting to see if there's any feedback, typos, that kind of thing. And also, there's a couple more things, not major things I want to put in there, but I want to just put a couple more drawings in and so on. Right, so that's cleaned that. And I'll do the same here. Now, of course, now I've turned it down. What I don't want to do is break it off. I'm going to use borax. I used it last time. I can't remember what it was. It was a crutch, wasn't it? A few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we sold the crutch on this same clock, the leader. And that was really successful, just using borax, not any kind of special proprietary brand of silver soldering flux. Clean it. I'm going to have to put this back in the lathe and turn the hole in it again, because of course that's also gotten black, oxidized. So let's just pop it back in there, see, and find another grey. I could do one with a nice fine point on it. Again, a lozenge shaped graver is incredibly useful. In fact, for years it was my favorite graver. What I'm going to use here is one of those made out of an 1/8 shank carbide drill. So those drills, if you've used carbide drills, you'll know that you just look at them and they break, and so you get a lot of the shank, the shank part of it kicking around, and they make incredibly useful gravers, both round section as they are, and also put this pyramid on the end. Absolutely brilliant for finding the center and that kind of thing. So don't chuck them out. Well, being a Yorkshireman, of course, nothing ever gets thrown out. Broken drills, incredibly useful. There we go. So I just turned the end neat again and lost Get more hair in the process pulled out by this belt. But anyway, that's less painful than holding that bit of steel, marginally. Not that it's a competition to see which process is more painful, most painful. Anyway, so we've got both our bits of steel cleaned up now, and I'm just going to take that off there. And I'm going to use my poor old lathe to hold the bits of metal in line. You could just pin them on, like we do with the crutch. We pinned them on the refractory blocks. Well, let's just get that something like running true. There we are. Nice. And let's get that bit of metal in our tailstock. But actually what I want next, you wouldn't think soldering 2 bits of metal was such a complicated process, is I want a little heat sink and to protect this pivot here. So at this, there's a square, then there's a pivot, then there's a bit of arbor, then there's a pinion. So to prevent the heat traveling to the pinion, which is quite easy because we can just put a bit of cloth around there that's soaked in water. But to protect the pivot, it's slightly more difficult because it's going to get very hot and the cloth will burn. So I'm going to put a bit of brass around there, and I'm going to use, in fact, I'm just going to get rid of that for a minute. Yeah, 1 step forward and 3/4 step back. Going to use just a bit of brass, a bush. So don't really use these bushes much. I normally use the bushing wire. But incredibly, these are actually incredibly useful as well for all sorts of other jobs. And the reason I don't use these bushes that much, I do sometimes, is that it's really tempting to use them by pivot diameter and not by outside diameter. I know this isn't a conversation about depthing and bushing, it's a conversation about soldering. So I tend to avoid these bushes a bit. So the arbor's 2.2 mil. So the good thing about this is 2.25 is come too big. So if we use a number 20 bush like that, we can pop them in there. We can open this up and hopefully get it to be a really good tight fit on our arbor, on the pivot, sorry. You see it doesn't fit on yet, it's too big. So let's just quickly get a broach. Oh, that was the case. One of my pair of brass lined, many pairs of brass lined pliers has already got a cutout in it. These things are kind of consumable in a way. Don't quite know how we're gonna gauge it. Let's just get a pin vise. Different collet needed. So beyond this, if this is successful today and we get the gathering pallet soldered maybe as well, I'll do that next week. We've got the hour pipe to solder back on, soft solder back on. And then we're pretty much done with the movement. I think we can move on to making the hands, which I'll probably do a bit of online, and then the rest of it in my own time, because it's going to be quite time consuming. Quite a lot of interest in making hands at the moment. We've got a request for making French clock hand out of steel. I'm going to use a bit of old mainspring. We had a request today on Facebook for making a, I'll be talking, this will be too big, nearly. That's the beauty of the cutting broach, of course, is you can, it's an infinite number of sizes. This one's not particularly sharp. I could maybe sharpen it up, but so yeah, something about making hands. I mean, with making hands, there's no great mystery to it. You just kind of got to get stuck in, really. Obviously, begin by practicing on something pretty straightforward. Again, this is why I'm a real fan of new making. You know, if you've got, it's an incredible luxury. I'd love to get back into it again, maybe one day. Right, okay, there we go. So much talking and not enough concentrating. I'd love to get back into new making one day. And because the thing is, once you've made your own clock, it all these processes are just so simple because you've basically been through the pain barrier. Okay, top tip. We know that if I can find it again, the one I've just done is, I think it's that one, isn't it? Yeah, so the one I've just broached out is fractionally too big. So to prevent myself making the same mistake again, just put a mark there with Sharpie pen on my broach, and I can broach up to that diameter, or actually broach a little bit less than that diameter without having to try it time and time again. So yeah, new making, a great fan of it. As I say, if you get that opportunity and it's a big luxury, then go for it. Yeah, broken tools are really good. All files, of course, are that, you know, especially if you can get sort of files from the middle of the 20th century, really good quality steel, and then you can make all sorts of nice tools from them. Right, there we are. Managed to do it and concentrate this time. So that's a really good fit there. If I push it on and turn it off later if necessary. So that's going to, if you can see, just gone up to the edge of the shoulder. So really pleased with that. Let's get that junk out of the way and go back to our lathe. Stroke magic solder holding device. Get that in there. Okay, so it's running true. That's close enough. And then get our bit of steel, which I haven't lost in the tailstock. Got steel wool somewhere. So a little bit of steel wool for a final clean up there. Remember to dispose of your steel wool safely because it can be a real fire hazard. But I'm just going to put that back in as well and clean that in the same way. I'd rather be slightly obsessive about cleaning this up than having to try and get off silver solder that's not joined properly, which is an absolute total pain. Right, there we go. So hopefully those two surfaces are nice and clean now. Don't touch them. Put that in there. Pop the bed of the lathe through a little bit. I've got a bit more room. Hold that back in there. Good. Nice and true. Then we can hopefully, if the lathe bed's long enough, I could put collet in there, I suppose. Just gonna about do it. All those two things together. All good. And we're ready to go. So the next thing to do is to mix up some flux and then find our solder. Not quite know how I'm going to hold a bit of solder on. I think what I could do, I suppose, I could trap it between the two surfaces. And then as I heat it, use the lever operated tailstock of the lathe here to get it to focus. Use the lever operated tailstock of the lathe to actually push them together. Maybe that's an idea. Then I'm absolutely sure that the solder's in there. So yeah, bit of solder then. Let's get our solder reel out. And our flux cone. So this is the same stuff that we used a couple of weeks ago on the crutch. It's you can see it's quite yellowy coloured. It's the easiest they call it, which means I can see my cutters. I can see my cutters on the screen, so I know they're not far. Don't want that. Get a bit more steel wool to clean this up. Get rid of as much oxide as you can. So it's the easiest or the lowest melting point solder I can find. Silver solder doesn't have to be particularly white coloured or pretty. So if it looks a bit yellow, that's fine. We're not doing silversmithing, but importantly there, clean it up again and don't touch it. Bit of I'm going to try and flatten a bit and see how that works. I think that might be okay. It's flattened down. I'm just going to get a punch and punch a center in it so it holds in place. That might actually work. At least we know the solder will be there if we do that. So just got a center punch. I'm going to, of course it's blunt, but anyway, what's new there? Like totally blunt. Put a little divot in the end, you can see that. So hopefully that's going to allow me to trap it between the two. Try not to cut it off too short. So now we've got some water. So some flux, borax flux. Yeah, so just kind of mix it into a thick paste, get a flux brush. And I'll find myself a bit of cotton as well. So the heat sink, and also, of course, I don't want to let any flux go on the bed of my lathe. I'm sure there'll be, or would be, people out there rolling their eyes at using a lathe to solder in, but it's not the first time I've done it. And it's just incredibly easy way of getting those components lined up. So let's find our water.
Matthew Condon,
yeah.
What's the difference or benefit of using borax as opposed to liquid flux?
I've always used easy flow flux. So that's the stuff that's made a powder that you make up into a liquid by the manufacturer. And it's been okay, but I saw a demonstration by a silversmith called, was it Westin? It's quite a long time ago now. John, I forget his name, it will come to me. And they're soldering really complicated bits of silver, and they just always use the flux cone thing. And I thought, that can't ever work. You know, it's cheap and it looks so easy. But indeed, it does work. A bit more water on there. You can use also Argotect, Argotect, or like a bronze brazing flux, which is meant to be anti-fire stain. But again, I've never really particularly found that they work that well. And this is just really good value for money. And it's easy. You can just put it in the drawer, you know, you wash the thing when you're finished with it, put it in the drawer, come and use it like that, and it's done. I think maybe if you're using higher temperature solders, like special silver solders that you can get for soldering stainless steels and things, then maybe you would want a specialist or kind of flux. But actually, for this so far, anyway, let's see in a minute whether I'm speaking too soon. Already dried up a bit. Let's put a bit more water in. But try it. The cone, you get this earthenware dish thing that you grind the bottom of the cone into. It's really inexpensive. In fact, you often see them at clock auctions, and nobody really wants them because they maybe don't know what they are or what you do with them. So try it. The cones are just a couple of pounds or something. They're really not a lot of money. Right, so I've got my bit of solder, and I could do to be able to see. Yeah. Just so I've got that trapped now. Just going to put on a bit more flux.
Eric says that he uses Siflux.
Yeah.
Silver soldering at work. What does it work?
Which is, I think it's a bronze flux, isn't it? I remember, if anybody remembers old Alan Timmins from the BHI, one of the first short courses I went on there was with Alan. He was great, actually. And he always recommended Siflux. I think it's SIF, isn't it? Siflux. And yeah, really good. I've been through all those things, and this for the, I mean, as you can see, I don't do much sort of making fabrication now, so this works fine for these small joints. Try it. So just building up a bit of flux on there, and I don't know what the word is for it now. It's that sort of a concentration, maybe that's the word. Rare thing. Because you're going to get one hit at this. If it doesn't work, then got to clean it all up again and start again. Right, there we are. I think I've probably faffed about enough with that. And
So yes, it's a bronze flux.
yeah, that cloth is probably going to also set on fire. A bit more water on it. And our torch. I'm going to heat from, because I don't want to heat the arbor. Obviously, it has to get hot enough to solder. So I'm going to heat from this end. I don't also really want to heat my chuck up either on my lathe. I can hear the bit of cotton doing its job, hissing away there. Might actually just put a bit more water on it now. I can locate my brush. So I realized halfway through that operation that I actually needed one of those things that Ian's got, the old soldering third hand thing, because I couldn't hold the block and my torch and push the tailstock in at the same time. But it appears to, I haven't looked at the it appears to have soldered fine. I wasn't putting enough pressure on the tailstock, so the two parts haven't quite come together in alignment as I hoped they would, but I don't think it's worth me heating them up. I could do with a bungee cord on there, pushing the tailstock along, which I didn't have, of course. So I'm just going to check the alignment again before I commit to.
It says you'll end up with a rusty lathe.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm trying to keep the flux off it. Again, it's a good job I'm not a member of any associations that enjoy lathe, because I would get booted out yet again. But you know what's new. Yeah, it's of course bad practice to do this, and also to use any sort of abrasive or anything on your lathe. And you do avoid that. You put paper on it and all those kind of things. But ultimately, it's is it fair to say it's a tool thing to be used? I don't know. I should have done it like that, shouldn't I? Right, well, I am going to heat it up again because it isn't aligned particularly well. See if I can try and improve it a bit. Unnecessary amount of heat there, really. I'd have been a bit more organized, but hopefully that has allowed it to align a bit better. Let's just have a little look. Yeah, it looks a lot better. It's actually started to melt the little bit that I cut it away. So all good, he says, rather optimistically, but anyway, doesn't pay not to be optimistic, does it? Get that off.
Uses a thin sheet of aluminium bent over the bed.
That's again, it's a good idea, Derek, to keep the grinding off or flux or whatever it is that you're using.
Jeremy says, were the parts not quite touching in the middle of the cone?
Yeah, they were touching, but when I put the solder in, of course, there was a gap. When the solder melted, there was a gap. And so the first time, because I couldn't push the tailstock across, there was that gap and they were slightly offset like that. So at one side, although the solder had bridged the gap fine, there was no problem with strength. What it was offset to the degree that when I started filing it square again, it wouldn't have met at one side. So by doing it a little bit more, yeah, we've had to heat it a bit more here, but that's fine. I think we're actually good to go now. So what I can do is, should probably take it out and, oh, it's exactly 7 o'clock or thereabouts. So no, it's really good. Very pleased with that. I don't know if you can see, but not only is it lined up nicely, but the little brass badger that we put on has done its job. Look, there's no bluing of the pivot at all or discoloration of the pivot. So really pleased with that. But I do need to wash this flux off. So we'll take this opportunity to have a 3-minute comfort break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. I'll take this away, give it a good scrub with hot soapy water to prevent even more lathe rust, and then we'll snap this thing off and see how we go on. So just mute my mic for a minute. If I can find it. Right, thank you for that. So cleaned off the flux with a brass brush and some soap. That's good, and very happy with this. As you can tell, eyeglass gone. Still a bit of flux on it. The flux goes sort of very vitreous and glassy, so it takes some scraping off, but yeah, really happy with it. Just broken the end off by accident anyway. So that was really good. That really pleased about putting that cut in there, because we would have now had to start cutting it. We've already got a cone on the end, which means we can put it in the tailstock of our lathe to hold it while we begin to file it square. So when I file it, obviously I don't want to file down to, I want to file down to, but not into the square that was there before, because that square is already small enough. Certainly don't want to reduce its diameter. So let's bring our lathe back. We're going to go and look for the tailstock that's got, you know, the simple or the planar tailstock. So what we've got here, just pop that on there, is our tailstock runner. These are pretty standard fare. One end is a male center and the other end is a female center. On this end, it's already been cut away. I don't think that's done in the factory. I might have been, maybe just somebody's ground it. And it's absolutely perfect for this job because it allows us to, could do with the lens on the camera really, but we'll have to work around that. I think there we go, zoom in as far as we can. Yeah. So it allows us to file down closer to the center. But again, it's why these things have to be sometimes modified. So I don't think I'll get a 6-inch file in there. So let's look for a 4-inch file. There we go, something like that. When I say 4 inches, it's the length of the blade across, of course, not how far it was across. So let's have a look here. Yeah, I think that's going to be absolutely fine. So I'm going to use the, I don't know if you can see that, I can just see it peeking, just zoom out a little bit, peeking there. The indexing, that's the word I was looking for, sorry, indexing pin, which locates in these holes drilled into the back of the pulley there. And I don't know whether they're already marked for quarters, they might be. I think there's a crazy number of holes in here, like 40 or something. Is that right? Can't remember. Let's just have a little count up. So we'll start there. I can't see that. Right. So start. Yeah, 40, which I remember counting it before and thinking that why didn't they use a more sensible number that was more divisible by more numbers, like 60, for instance, would have been far better. But anyway, they didn't. So we've got start 1, 2, 3. Yeah, always useful. So
it's 60.
60 what is a better number? 60 is a far better number. There aren't 60 on here, they're only 40. It's not a Schaublin, unfortunately, where they actually put sensible numbers on the.
His lathe has got 60.
Oh yeah, it's a much better number. Right, okay, so there we go. You can see what's going to happen. I'm going to move it. And this isn't to file it square per se. You know, when we were talking about filing square the other day, I'm amazed that somebody didn't say, get a roller rest for your lathe. You could get a roller rest for your lathe, and then you could throw it away for this kind of work, because the squares are not parallel. It's not a watch winding stem we're making. It's an old clock. So it doesn't really help you. Personally, not one of my favorite tools, but anyway. So now I'm just going to line up the square with what we've got here. So loosen off the collet a bit. And it's a case of feeling where the square is. I'll just keep a close eye on it as we go along. I suppose if I had something like an engineer's tool clamp or something to clamp on the square to give me a better indication of actually square, that would be useful. Doesn't look too bad. So I'm just going to start filing rather haphazardly. So when I file, I'm obviously going to file this bit of metal that we've fixed on isn't actually part of the square that the gathering pallet is going to fit on. It's just the bit that you drill through. So as long as it's neat and we don't file into our old material, I'm going to be pretty happy with that. So I'm just going to it'll sound really grim to start with because we've got some flux on there still, so it's quite hard to file through. In fact, I'm just going to get a scalpel and scrape it off first. I don't think a week goes by on these events where we don't use the scalpel. Incredibly useful tool. There's just new material that I'm scraping the flux away from. Sounds terrible, but it's not that bad. I'm going to actually take it quite easy doing this because I'm really pleased with it so far, how it's gone. So I don't want to file into old material. So file dead slow. When you've got a difficult material, hardened steel, basically, it's amazing what you can file. But if you file quickly, start like this, it's going to be a disaster because the work will harden even more. The file will immediately blunt, and then you will get nowhere. So if you ever get in a situation, and it's obviously not an ideal situation to be in, where you have to harden file some steel that's probably a bit harder than you would normally like, then if you file dead slow, it's like turning. I mean, when I say dead slow, I mean like really, really slow. And it's amazing what you can do. And then once in this case, the poor old file gets through that grim surface, you can hear that it's cutting, not slipping, but it's not cutting quickly. Even though we let that fluid steel down, it's still incredibly tough. So while I'm doing this, I'm thinking about next week and soldering that gathering pallet. So it's going to be a similar kind of process, but a little bit more hit and miss, because we've got to file the gathering pallet's cracked along its length, along the length of the square, and hopefully I've lost it altogether and I can just make a new one. Oh, there it is. And remind myself, yeah. Right. So it's cracked across the square at both sides. The crack on one side isn't even a straight crack. It kind of wanders off a bit. So getting it clean is going to be tricky. We're going to have to, I'm going to use something like thread, some cord or something, and put some abrasive on it so I can clean in the inside of the square hole. And then on the outside, I'm going to probably have to use my scalpel and maybe even file somewhere for that solder to go. But then the challenge is the fact that the thing is worn sloppy on the square. So even if we soldered it on the outside, it isn't really going to help us. We need to add some material. So what I'm thinking about is, how do I do that? So I could either, I suppose actually what I could do is plug it up with a piece of brass and re-drill it, or a bit of bushing wire maybe. And maybe that's an idea. Drill out a bit of bushing wire, file it square, get it to be a really good fit. In which case, we might even be able to soft solder it. I don't know whether it'll be strong enough. So we need to both solder it on the outside to give it strength and fill up the gap as well so we can file it. So that's what I'll be thinking about between now and next week. Again, as we've seen on the group this week, you know, many different ways to reach the same goal. It was interesting. I mean, I'm going to write up those ideas and we'll discuss it on Saturday, as I said. Interesting, the kind of concepts, some things I would have never thought of. I've probably been, despite what you might think by seeing these events, as sort of involved in the museum and conservation world for a long time, and I really love it. But a couple of people said, yeah, because you can make the repair invisible, and you know, nothing wrong with that, but it's just not something that would have ever crossed my mind, frankly, that I'd want to make it invisible. It is kind of what it is, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, there was some great ideas. I came up with about 6 ideas, but there were a whole lot more on top, so that was good fun. And the vote that won out was to lap joint, a soft solder lap joint, a piece of metal on. So I've got some of that CZ108, which I will fix on Saturday. So this is quite tough going. There's 2 things happening here. One is that I've filed down to where this thing has been cut away. So I'm actually just going to look for this badger, which is a bit of peg wood or something that will do the job. I think that fits in there. Made this years ago when I used to polish pivots upon clocks. Of course, I don't do that anymore, so, but it's really useful for this and it isn't going to keep ruining my file. It's a lot better. It's not filing into there.
Derek says that if you'd sleeved gathering arbor, you could have filed to fit the gathering pallet.
Yeah, I could have done. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Derek. I could have put a bit of material around it and made it oversized and then worked down to size. That would have been probably a lot more sensible than what I'm doing, really. That's absolutely true. And I remember you suggesting that. So thank you for reminding me. Yeah, it's always a problem with squares when they wear, well, they don't often wear small, actually. The worst, there's no such thing, but one of the biggest sort of things that makes me pull my hair out are when people file winding arbor squares. You can tap those burrs and things back into place. Because once you make the square smaller, obviously the key that was with the clock doesn't fit anymore, seeing as a new key, but then the whole situation goes downhill. So, you know, if you find yourself removing material from any historic object, there should probably be something in your mind that's going am I doing the so-called right thing here, bearing in mind there's no right thing. So this is filing nicely now. That bit of wood's much better as a support than the steel was actually. Let's have a little look how, yeah, we're coming down to size quite nicely. It's going to take, I'll finish this after we finish tonight and then put a photograph on the Facebook page. But yeah, quite happy. Just, and don't know if you noticed or not, but when we were, I don't know where it's gone now, on my little test piece thing that we filed up the other day, the way that you get these things fit together reasonably well is to make them very slightly tapered, like a brooch taper, which is, of course, like old clockmaking was done. So when I put my file on here, kind of eyeing it like that, parallel with the square that's there, and then just tipping my file back ever so slightly. You know, if anything, I want to stay away from old material. And then when we get down, so we're really nearly down to size, then I'm going to finish it with a needle file, filing along the length of the work to smarten it up a bit. Yeah, the silver solder's tricky to file, but it's all right. It's getting there, as they say. You can just feel with your fingernail there. It's nearly flush on that square at least. A little bit more on this one to come off. So again, just using my finger as a guide, which is on the whole scale of setting fire to my eyebrows and then pulling my hair out on my lathe belt is actually the least painful of those things. So it's nice to end in the relative. Yes, good. I'm amazed, as you can hear by the incredulity in my voice, that it's actually worked. Yeah, getting there. Yeah, that's nearly flush. And probably about, yeah, that's good too. Probably about there. So the next thing I'm going to do in the last few minutes is to get a needle file. So of course, remember, we're trying to keep this work, as always, as flat and as square as possible. So it's inevitable that when you're filing, that you kind of rock like this a little bit, so the whole thing becomes humpbacked, which is what we want to avoid. So this draw filing at the end is going to smarten it. You know, I was filing then, and as neatly as you do it, you're going to be rocking about a little bit. So what I'm going to do with my file, top tip coming up, is to bend it like this, you know, nice flexible file. So if you look along the length, you see it bending like that. So I'm going to bend it down without snapping it, hopefully, like this, and file along the length, which, if I do any rocking, will help to alleviate that and keep it nice and square. So there's actually, I can see here in the reflected light, it's actually easier to see. Got a way to go. I'm going to leave it slightly oversized and try that gathering palette in place, because I wonder whether it's actually going to help us in our quest to make that gathering palette a really good fit on there next week when we solder it. It's all getting exciting, isn't it? Although it's, say we haven't quite reached the end of this project yet. We're definitely, after last week's chaos, definitely in the kind of zone of beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Right, I'm just going to, this will mean that I lose my indexing, but I'm just going to try it because we're probably, yeah, just about running out of time. So I rather jokingly wish that I'd used the gathering palette and have to make a new one. There it is. Yeah, that's interesting because our new square and the gathering palette are a pretty damn good fit. Of course, it doesn't help us because the whole thing's got to come all the way up here. So I'm just going to get a small square file and begin to open up all that soft solder that's in there. That's probably actually pretty misleading. I'll get a brooch, I think, first to shove through the hole and break on through to the other side, as they say. So I'll just get stabbing my finger. So when I've just used that brooch to scrape out some of that soft solder. Now with the soft solder, of course, the beauty of that is that you can now see the hole in the end. When you file that, you can feel the really kind of soft, sticky bits. The harder bits. I've just got a pretty coarse square file here. So I'm not filing the gathering palette, I'm just getting that soft solder out. Try a bit from this end just to clean it up. Good. And try it on our arbor again. Yeah, I mean, that's really happy with that. If only that's where we were, but regrettably we're not, because this is cracked anyway. It wouldn't, even if it felt good for the time being, it wouldn't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I don't know if you can see that, I'll put a photograph on Facebook when I've worked on it a little bit more, but super happy with that. If that goes up to there, there's going to be, as we wanted, so the light's pretty bad, isn't it? About, it's maybe not 1/4 of an inch, it's about 4.5, 5 millimeters sticking through. So I've got loads there to cross drill and put our pin in when it's finished, which might be next week. But yeah, good. That's an incredibly strong job. And although I had to remove some of the end of the arbor to get that cone on there to align with the new bit, I was really pleased I did that, because if I'd have tried lining up 2 bits of flat-ended material, the chance of that working as well wouldn't have been so good. And I was able to trap that bit of flattened solder in there. So once I figured out how to use the lever tailstock, it made a really super strong joint. And all we need to do now is to figure out a way of soldering this and then filling up the gap a little bit, which is not impossible, just still thinking it through. Actually, maybe Derek's on to, obviously Derek's onto something because it's Derek, but maybe we can actually put a really thin, we can solder this with hard solder, then put a really thin tube of brass round the new bit, because I've not removed any material from there, and then file that right down, maybe something like that. So we've got like 3 layers of material. I don't know. Anyway, we've got a week to think about it before we have to see how it goes. Is that a question?
You made the comment about the repair should be visible.
Not should be visible, but it never appeals to me to make it invisible. But anyway.
Can you say something about that? Derek says, if you could make a repair invisible, why wouldn't you?
Because I love the so-called legitimacy of the repair as much as, I mean, the repair is the only thing I can control. We can conjecture about the past, what makers did, and all that stuff, context, but we don't know. And histories, as we know, are very slippery, fluid things. They're kind of history's made up stuff. The only thing we can be in is in the moment. And so if I were going to make the repair invisible, I'll try and make it invisible. The point is that it's, for me anyway, not invisible. If it's this is going to sound a bit crazy, so it's a bad answer, but an invisible repair is as visible as a visible repair. It doesn't make any difference to me. I really would just prefer to concentrate on my bit. And if it's of a different material, if it's blue, if it's plastic, whatever, I don't really mind. I'm not particularly interested in the old stuff. I'm only interested in what I'm working on now, because that's all I can control. And even then, that's pretty sort of questionable. And then I would say, why are we trying to make it invisible? I would sort of big up clock repairers and the work they do and try and make that in every way, physically and kind of metaphorically, as visible as possible. Let's shout about it from the rooftops, which of course is what we're doing by making these things public. But that's not to say that's not an option. I just wasn't an option I'd considered for 20 years, basically more than 20 years. And of course, you have to bear in mind the context of the thing. So there's a difference between the strap on the French clock, which is hidden inside the case anyway, nobody sees it other than a clock repairer, and something like a hand. And I had this run in many years ago with people I was involved with in an institution, saying, well, surely if that hand was, like, say, made out of aluminium and it was a Thomas Tompion clock, you would want to make a new one that was like blended in or something, or looked like the original. And I think there's a point that I am probably ill-equipped to discuss there, and that is, if you make a new hand, say, for a clock, and you do it the best you can, and it looks like the old one might have done, to me, it isn't any more like the old one than making one out of Day-Glo perspex or something. So I think the answer to that is to have a wider range of options as possible, and always question, why am I doing this? What's the motivation for it? And what I would say there, it's not for me to make that decision, but if your motivation is something to do with past makers or future owners, then that for me is really questionable, because the past is made up and the future doesn't exist yet, and that's also kind of made up. So for me, I've got to be in the here and now. And ultimately, let's go back to the French clock strap, and then we'll go home in a minute. Ultimately, if I was going to make that thing invisible, that's often toning in and doing things like patinating new work. The ceramics conservation industry is a classic one there, because that goes through fashion. Sometimes ceramics missing parts, lacunas, are made up with white material, so it's obvious what it is. Sometimes they are touched in, and I saw a thing in the Icon Journal about paper this week, and sometimes it's color matched to make it tone in. I think there's no right answer to that, but I would say what my sort of ultimate arbiter is if after we finish this event, somebody from some institution comes online and says, Matthew, what were you doing there? Why were you doing that? I have to be able to the best possible put my hand on my heart and say, I did that for this very good reason. And for me, that reason, that justification, that kind of in the court of law thing, can't be anything about the future, and it can't really be certainly can't be anything about the past. It has to be, I did it for these very good reasons on this day. And for me, it's what I would rather sort of probably pompously call the legitimacy of the repair. So there we are. That's kind of a bit of a discussion. It's one of those discussions that is never ending, and that's really great. I'm really glad that we're having the dialogue. So there you go. So I'll work on this a little bit more now. I'll pop a picture on Facebook. Then next week we can crack on with soldering the gathering pallet. So as always, massive thank you to the audience. Really lovely to see you all there. Yeah, Jeremy says, nice one, Derek. Good question. Why do you not want to make it invisible? Think about it. We'd love to know what you think. Let's kick it about. This may seem like a sort of autocracy, but it's not meant to be, really honest. So let's hear what I really love that idea of some kind of community conservation or treatment. Normally that means conservators working in a public space saying this is what we do, but actually when other interested parties, shareholders, get involved, that's really, really cool, as it did on our Facebook group this way. So let's keep that discussion going, and we'll see you on Saturday, hopefully, at Open Clock Club. If not, we'll see you next Thursday, all being well. And in the meantime, on Facebook. And you can check out my new website as well if you've, it's a bit rough around the edges, but you can drop by there and have a look. More to add to that. Again, thank you for buying the depthing and bushing. If you're new to clockmaking and you want to get into doing bushing, which is a bit of a rite of passage, I do get that, then our what we feel is a comprehensive work on the subject is £9. It's on Kindle. And biggest all thank you to Team Open Clock Club. Yeah, sat in the corner has been keeping everybody safe with the live chat. So bye for now. We will see you very soon, hopefully. Look after yourselves. Right.